Just got back from Florida for ReefaPalooza, and man, it was just really interesting to get back in the saddle and just see everyone and see all the corals again.
Just getting myself a little more centered here. Yeah. Was that the first real big reef show post-COVID craziness?
What's funny is I guess my last big show was Reef Stock, the one that we organize, and that happened the weekend before all the lockdown restrictions started happening.
Oh, wow.
And there's been, probably a smattering of like smaller show that were very socially distanced and all masks on. I just thought it was so interesting that, the CDC guidelines got rolled back for vaccinated people the day before ReefaPalooza, or 2 days before ReefaPalooza. And, it was going to be really socially distanced, and they were going to limit the number of people, which they still did, but then they made the mask wearing optional. So I just thought it was really interesting that the last big show was Reef Stock, and then the first new show was ReefaPalooza. And usually I love ReefaPalooza the most because it's a show I don't have to organize.
Yeah, you can just go in and enjoy it.
Yeah, and that's usually, preceded just by a month or two by Reef Stock, but this time it's been like 15 months. So it was very different, man. It was different, and a few new products. I think the companies have been changing their strategy on how they release new products. A lot of companies have used ReefaPalooza and Reef Stock and Macna and Interview to launch major projects to get a lot of buzz. And so this time there's some things I hadn't seen before, or maybe just hadn't noticed. And I picked up the new Hanna nitrate checker. I love how it's like high range, but it's not like extra high range. It's just not the sub ppm version that they released, I guess sometime last year. And then a new waterproof, 2 decimal place pH pen, also from Hanna, and looking forward to using that. But it was really, it was really fun. You said you were thinking about driving down, but you didn't say anything.
Yeah, being in Atlanta, it's a drivable distance, and I was half tempted to go, but had a lot of work and family stuff going on, and it just would have been too much effort to try to squeeze it in. So I was like, but it was tempting. It was really tempting given its location was drivable.
Well, next time you're thinking about it, let me know, and I'll fly to Atlanta, and then we'll drive together, and that should make the commute a little easier.
Yeah, be a little road trip. It'd be fun.
One thing that definitely struck me about ReefaPalooza, and I guess I kind of knew this instinctively, but now I know it discreetly. There's a lot of companies, lifestyle companies, who count on income from the Reef Aquarium shows more than just a supplement to their day-to-day business, their retail sales. And I know some of these companies, that's pretty much all that they do.
Yeah, that's interesting. So their online presence or their retail presence is you're basically saying is heavily supplemented by showing up to all these different shows. So thereby this whole COVID thing must have done a number on them not having that ability, I guess.
Yeah, and you really see that in the corals that are offered. I just want to let all viewers know that there are a lot of corals that are very affordable, almost free. Like there's lots of corals out there that are locally super abundant. Certain monoporas, orange cap, purple digi, milka stylo, some fast growing acros that are practically free. Some stores don't even bother to like take them in as trade-in anymore, right? Because they're so common. And everybody's always focused on the hype corals, right? And they didn't. And because we're only excited about, $800 torches and $400 little chunks of, orange and green Montes, or, real showy LPS, people think that the hobby is really expensive, but that's just what gets the most attention.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
right?
I had the same thought this weekend. For one, you go to a lot of these coral vendor websites and you get like the sticker shock. And even on Live Aquaria, when you start looking at like their LPS section, right, and you sort by price, it's like $100 and up, and you're like, man. But then you go into their aquaculture section and sort that by price, low to high, and you're like, okay, instinctually I want to start thinking that things are getting crazy. But I mean, and I'm just using them as a vendor example because I think everybody's familiar with them. But then you start to see like, okay, there's stuff out there. I mean, if I was getting into it, there's plenty of cool, interesting
I would say,
corals.
really experienced reefers like you and I, we know who to call.
Yeah.
But there's certain corals that, like, if you took the time to frag them and put them on a plug, you wouldn't expect to get more than $5 or $10 at a store or at a trade show. And like the tech reviewers do not spend all their time talking about budget PCs, super entry level stuff, or car reviewers don't talk about $5,000 everyday cars by Tata Motors or something like that. And I really want people to know that yes, there are a lot of very expensive corals, but the very hype corals from 10 years ago are like practically free. If you look at your local Facebook group or forums or whatever, like you'll find people who are just like trying to give this stuff away, like you.
Or they dump it in their backyard.
Throwing away a big old colony of fox flame acropora. It's just like it's not even worth my time to chop it up and try to parse it out. Although that's more of a valuable one, but it just takes some work to get that into other people's hands, and I really feel like that's where the community comes in for getting the non-hype corals.
Yeah, and sort of like what you hit a nail on the head of like the stuff that people were really excited about maybe 5 years ago. Maybe you got to go back 10 years ago or more. That's the stuff that is affordable now because everybody's moved on to the new shiny thing. But people were excited about those corals for a reason, right? They were colorful. They were interesting or exciting. There's something cool about them. So they got their notoriety for a reason. It's what you choose to focus your attention on, right? Like you can get mad about stuff that's out there and frustrated. And I certainly have.
Outrage.
Yeah, I do, right? The Instagram stuff drives me a little crazy, but then I remember like I have a choice in how I choose to react to that stuff and what I choose to look at. And yeah. I
mean, what coral vendor is going to really take the time to offer $5 frags of Anthelia?
Right.
Right? Everybody always wants xenia at some point in their aquarium career, but unless it's colorful, like, how much is a frag plug, right? There's certain kinds of frag plugs and discs. I mean, you might be talking about 10 up to 50 cents per piece, plus the labor, plus the bag, plus the rubber band. It's like not even worth these retailers' time to deal in these super cheap corals. And so I want people to know that, like, when I do my coverage of these reef shows, man, I'm just as guilty. I'm not sitting there taking videos of just normal zoanthids and just normal sticks. And first of all, acropora frags are just really hard to capture on camera without a really dedicated macro lens to photograph. And so that's one of those reasons, like, it's way easier to whip out my phone and have a little yellow lens on there to do a little video of like a 12-inch donut coral. And for those of you that don't know what donut coral, because I feel like some of our colloquialisms are getting lost, that's an acanthophilia, a meat coral. It's second nature for me. I'm like, yeah, man, I will film like $30, $500 acanthophilias because they're there and they're beautiful and they're super photogenic. But there's also a lot of vendors. One company that always has great deals is Hobie Sound Frags. I don't really know them that well, but I did feature them in one of my videos. And you're seeing that more, but it doesn't make the headlines. But there's plenty of vendors now who will have like a $20 section, a $30 section, or I think I saw one that was like 7 frags for $100. Like, there's a lot of good stuff. And one thing about the sunset monopora and the rainbow monopora and the Superman is they're gorgeous, and it takes a little bit of effort to get them super blossoming. And I would have to confess that I've grown all those corals a lot, but I've rarely had them like really, really shining the way some euphyllias do way more easily.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some vendors that I've bookmarked that I mean, they sell some of the expensive stuff, but I feel like they're also somewhat reasonable in bringing in some interesting stuff at reasonable prices, right? I like Austin Aqua Farms a lot. You know, they bring in some cool Aussie LPS corals, and those are never really cheap, but I feel like the way that they price them is fair. You know, I've had good experiences with a lot of different vendors, and I also think that, you know, it's if you take the time to grow the coral, right? That's the other thing. It's like if you get into collectoritis mode, it's not good for your bank account.
It's not good for your reef tank.
It's not, you know, and I see, not to jump into the Instagram thing, but I see these tanks where I'm like, what's going to happen when all these corals start growing, you know, because there's like 150 frags in that tank.
I saw an acro tank yesterday that was just like, they've been going for like a year or two, but someone's like always in there, always messing with it, always kind of rearranging or kind of replacing corals. And so like the growth form of the acros is kind of convoluted and twisted. And you can just kind of tell that things haven't been able to settle down. Not to mention there's like 3 or 4 juvenile large angelfish species that are having quite a buffet of those SPS polyps.
Hey, good for them.
But yeah, I really want to hammer it home, like, you know, a sunset Monty, a rainbow Montipora in perfect condition that you could probably find for like $10 down to free is going to shine just as hard as like a slow burn or a Jaegernaut or a Kung Pao Montipora, you know. And the same acro tank that I saw yesterday had a whole lineup of all those hype, you know, orange to green Montiporas, but they were all like 2 to 3 inches across. None of them had really like developed full features yet. Like they looked beautiful. They had awesome color, good texture, but there was like 15 of them, and honestly, from just like 2 feet away, they don't really look any different. You know, same thing with the Holy Grail torches. First of all, like that name, I don't even know if it means anything anymore because there's so many permutations I've seen just in the last 5 days. I'm like, which one's the holiest Grail? Because I'm not really sure. But you know, the real upside to some of these corals being mega valuable. Here's a perfect example, bro. I'm trying to figure out where to start. So there was an original UFO micromusa, had really small polyps, and it was only red and yellow, but really small coralites, almost half the diameter of a typical small micromusa. And so that's the real UFO micromusa. I just want to throw that out there. But there's a new UFO micromusa that's kind of, I would call it maybe like a rainbow UFO, and has a little bit more of a black ring. You may have seen it. It's got a little orange, it's got a little green, it's got a little gray. It's really beautiful. The first piece I saw was in Indonesia, so it actually kind of makes me laugh when people say, oh, I introduced it to the hobby, or I had it first. I'm like, well, I saw it in the islands, so I don't know who you got it from, but you didn't introduce it. But over the last 2 or 3 years, that has made it stateside, probably in Europe too. And you know, the first few pieces were like, man, I'm guessing like at least $150 to $200 per polyp, which when you're talking about a micromusa, like I can understand pricing blastomusas and lords per polyp because, you know, they're big, they're nice, you know, 1 inch across, you know, and fully inflated. Micromusa maybe shouldn't be charging per polyp, but like 2 to 3 years ago, it was like $150, $300 for a 2 polyp frag, right? And at the show, man, everybody had it, and they didn't have 1 or 2. They had like 5 or 6 or 12 or 15, and they ranged in price from like $50 to $75. And I was thinking about getting one, and I picked out a nice single polyp frag. Homeboy wants to charge me for every single little baby polyp because the coral's encrusting down. I'm like, are you serious, dude? you want to count 7 polyps, but only one of them is like a 1/4 inch in diameter? But the price is coming down. And I literally just looked at him. I'm like, you know what? I'll wait a year. I'll buy a bigger piece for a lot less. I don't know, this fall or this time next year, you know, so you don't always have to jump on the hype stuff, man. Let somebody else grow it out and don't break your bank. But that is one of the interesting upsides. Like, you and I have been through these cycles of disbelief. when the watermelon A&I chalice sold for $400, when the first frag of Sunset Monte sold for $400, when the My Miami chalice sold for $1,500. And you know what? I don't know, 5-6 years later, I picked up a 3-inch colony of My Miami for like $200. So that is one of the real silver linings of these corals that you can propagate. So we're not talking scolies and donuts, is that it really incentivizes the coral farmers to put them into intensive culture. And next thing you know, a few years down the road, it's everywhere. Sure, it might not be exciting, but it's still the same coral, right?
Yeah, but then the new person comes along and is focused on the next chalice that everybody's excited about. But, if you took the hype away from it and you just laid these corals out in front of somebody that's getting into the hobby, I think that they wouldn't lean towards the hottest new thing probably. They'd be like, I like that really pink one. Or, like they may gravitate toward different ones. So, I think it's important to always have a conversation with yourself when you buy anything, even outside of the hobby. Like, why do I want this thing, right? Like, what is it that's driving me to buy it?
Excellent point. What is my motivation for this?
It helps,
I'm really lucky right now because everybody's got blued out tanks. And you know what kind of corals don't look good under blue light?
Blue corals.
Blue corals. Blue, lavender, non-fluorescent pink corals, like bird's nest.